My name is Catriona Wexley, 71 years old, retired medical lab technician, widow for 10 years, and mother to one daughter who used to call me her best friend. The morning air outside Seabrook Garden Hall smelled of salt and cut roses. Guests moved in small clusters, adjusting their jackets, holding gift bags wrapped in gold paper. I stood at the edge of the entry path, just beside the white arch I had helped pay for months ago, watching them file inside. A few smiled politely, the way people do when they recognize a face but can't place where from. I had chosen a simple blue dress, pressed the night before. My hands still trembled from habit. Years of careful pipetting never left you, even in retirement. Thessaly was radiant near the door, a flash of lace and soft curls. For a moment, pride almost outshone the unease sitting in my chest. I reached into my purse and took out a small velvet box. Inside lay the silver brooch my mother wore at her wedding, something old, something borrowed. She saw it and hesitated. Then, without looking at me directly, she whispered, "Mom, you're not welcome here." It wasn't anger in her voice. It was fear of me, of what I represented. The words found their way into every corner of the courtyard. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A camera flash went off and then no more. Her future mother-in-law, Ria Marrow, stood behind her, one manicured hand resting lightly on Thessaly's shoulder. She nodded once, approval disguised as sympathy. I could feel every muscle in my body wanting to fold, to vanish. Instead, I closed the velvet box, the hinge clicking louder than I expected. My throat burned, but my voice stayed steady. "Consider your wish granted." The violinist paused halfway through the prelude. Even the gulls circling above seemed to hover, waiting for something else to break. I turned toward the road, the hem of my dress brushing against the gravel, and walked away from the arch, the music, and the daughter I had raised through too many nights to count. Behind me, the bay wind carried the faint echo of applause. Ahead, only quiet waited. I let it. By the time I reached my apartment above the Marine Museum, the bay had gone black and still. The tide lapped against the pilings below like someone knocking without patience. I let myself in, the air carrying that faint mix of salt and old varnish that never quite leaves wood. I slipped off my shoes at the door, feeling the familiar creak underfoot. The space was small, but mine 2 rooms, one clock ticking too loudly. I set my purse on the counter and pulled out the velvet box. It was still unopened. The brooch inside could wait. Everything could wait tonight. I filled the kettle, then stopped halfway. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from the kind of exhaustion that sits under your ribs. I leaned against the counter, watching the water settle. After my husband died, Thessaly was 12, then I worked nights at the hospital lab. The hum of centrifuges became my lullaby. I used to come home at dawn, find her asleep on the couch waiting for me, school books scattered across her lap. She'd wake just enough to mumble, "You're home," before rolling back into dreams. Years later, when the scholarship letter came, she cried in the kitchen, clutching it with trembling fingers. "We did it! Mom, we—" That word carried me for years. The kettle whistled softly, breaking the memory. I didn't make the tea. I sat instead, coat still on, staring at my phone lighting up the counter. 37 notifications. Missed calls, messages, friends of Ria, names from the wedding list. People who'd clapped when I left. None from Thessaly. My thumb hovered over her name for a long moment. Then I scrolled to the bottom and pressed delete. One by one, the names vanished, leaving the screen blank and harmless. The clock ticked louder. Outside, a ship horn sounded once before the harbor returned to quiet. I picked up the velvet box, ran my thumb along the edge, then set it back down unopened. The silence felt heavier than grief, but safer somehow, like a locked door I'd finally chosen not to open. Let the silence start, I said to the room, and for the first time all day, my voice didn't tremble. The next morning, my phone chimed before sunrise. I thought it might be Thessaly. It wasn't. The subject lines were stacked like quiet accusations, invoice reminder. Outstanding deposit. Final balance due. All from the vendors I had spoken with in the months before the wedding. Flowers, catering, photography. The amounts blurred together, but the pattern was clear. I opened the first one. Per our agreement. Payment authorization remains under C. Wexley until account transfer is processed. I read it twice. A cold pressure settling behind my ribs. Back in March. Thessaly had called me at work. Mom, they need a card on file to hold the date. Just for now. We'll switch it once Jonas's bonus clears. I'd said yes before she finished the sentence. It was always just for now with her. I scrolled to the bottom of the message and found the total $23,000. The number didn't even startle me. What hurt more was realizing I'd signed every page myself. Trusting her voice over fine print, I called the venue first. The coordinator, a young woman named Harper, sounded professional and kind in that detached way service workers learn. I'm sorry, Ms. Wexley, but we can't remove your authorization without written notice and a replacement payer approved by both parties. Both parties, I repeated, meaning the one who told me not to come. There was a pause. Yes, ma'am, after the call. I rang Mara Colvin, my neighbor and oldest friend. She had practiced family law before retiring. Send them a formal revocation. She said, keep it factual, not emotional, and make a list of every vendor tied to your name. Her voice was calm, steady, a metronome for my panic. By noon, my table was covered in printed contracts and coffee rings. I wrote each amount in longhand beside the vendor's name. The ink bleeding through the paper. Every figure felt like proof of how invisible I'd been while paying for everyone else's perfection. When I finally typed, Notice of Revocation of Payment Guarantee, Seabrook Garden Hall, the words looked strange on the page. Not angry, just exact. It was the first time in months my name meant something only to me. By midweek, Port Townsend had already decided what happened at the wedding. Small towns don't need confirmation, only a hint. At the bakery, the clerk who'd once asked about my lemon bread avoided my eyes. She boxed the loaf in silence, sliding it across the counter like a secret. Behind me, 2 women whispered near the pastry case. I caught only the words wedding and video. When I reached for my change, she murmured, heard it was filmed on someone's phone. The daughter said it right there in front of everyone. Her voice was soft. Meant as sympathy, but pity never lands that way. I left the bread, pushed open the door, and stepped into the cool air. My ears felt hot, my hands colder than the wind. The clip was real. Then, someone had recorded it Thessaly's words. My silence, maybe even the pause before I turned away. The harbor was quiet as I walked toward the pier. Fishing boats bobbed gently, ropes creaking against wood. I focused on the sound. Anything to drown out the murmur of voices still following me. Mrs. Wexley. The voice came from behind. I turned to see Jonas Marrow, suit jacket slung over one arm, tie loosened. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. I didn't expect to see you, I said. He shrugged. Needed air. It's been a week. Has it? My voice came out sharper than I meant. He looked out at the water. About that day you could have handled it differently. I waited. Differently. You could have pulled her aside, not made a scene. I almost laughed. I didn't make a scene. Jonas, I left one. He shifted his weight, jaw tight. She's under pressure. Ria's been... He stopped himself. So could she. I said quietly, He nodded once, a movement small enough to be mistaken for wind, then walked off toward the parking lot without another word. The pier was empty again. A gull landed on the railing beside me, feathers ruffling in the breeze. I stayed there until my breath evened out, until the sting behind my eyes cooled into something steadier. The water below moved without apology. The county records office smelled of paper dust and old carpet, a place built for patience. I stood in line with a folder pressed to my chest. Every document labeled in my small, neat handwriting. The man at the counter called, "Next," without looking up, and I stepped forward. "I need to file revocations for payment authorization," I said. "Vendors tied to the Seabrook Garden Hall wedding," he blinked, then gestured toward the form stack. 3 copies. 1 for us, 1 for the vendor, 1 for your records. His tone was flat, practiced. Bureaucracy was its own language, and I had learned it fast. Mara Colvin had reviewed everything the night before, red pen in hand. "Stay factual," she'd said, sliding the pages back to me. "You're not accusing anyone. You're correcting the record. Clause 9B gives you that right." Now, standing at the counter, I filled in each line carefully, dates, totals, contract numbers. The clerk watched me for a while, then said softly, "My mom had to do the same once. Different kind of wedding. Same kind of mess." I looked up. He gave a small, understanding smile. "It gets easier after the first form." When I handed him the stack, he stamped each one with a heavy thunk that felt like punctuation. "You'll get confirmation by mail in 2 weeks," he said. Outside in the hallway, I called the last vendor the florist who had refused to release my card information. "We can't process a change without the bride's consent," the woman said briskly. "Clause 9B. I replied, "Termination of liability by the guarantor. It's in your contract." 4th paragraph. Silence. Then paper rustling. "One moment. Yes, I see it. I'll expect written acknowledgement by Friday," I said, steady and polite. When the call ended, I sat on the courthouse bench. Folder closed, hands resting on top. No triumph. No vindication, just a slow unclenching somewhere behind my ribs. As I stepped outside, sunlight hit the courthouse steps, catching on the glass doors. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air move cleanly through my chest. My name was still mine, printed and stamped in black ink, but finally standing on its own. The envelope came on a Tuesday morning, thin but heavy with numbers. The florist invoice, the venue's overtime charge, the caterer's damage report, each now addressed to Mrs. Thessaly Marrow. The clerk at the courthouse had been efficient. My name was gone from every line. I read each bill once, then placed them in a neat stack beside the kettle. My credit card balance showed 0, for the first time in months. The total felt like peace, not emptiness. A smaller envelope rested on top, handwritten, no return address. Inside, a short note in looping cursive. "For what it's worth, everyone saw what she did. You deserved better." I didn't know who had sent it, maybe the pianist, maybe the photographer. It didn't matter. The words stayed on the table, quiet and plain, not gloating, just acknowledgement. I made tea and sat at the small kitchen table, the one Thessaly and I had painted blue when she was 8. The paint still showed her small thumbprint near the corner. I ran my hand over it, and the memory unfolded easily. She had been 10, standing on stage at her first piano recital. Halfway through the piece, she froze. The music stopped. Tears started. I'd gone to her after, crouched beside the bench while everyone watched. "We try again tomorrow," I told her, and she'd nodded. Eyes red but determined. We'd tried again the next morning, her fingers stumbling until the melody returned. That day, she'd called me her hero. Now, The memory felt like a photograph left too long in sunlight. Edges faded. Center still warm. I folded it gently away in my mind, not erased. Just stored. The tea cooled. Outside, gulls called over the harbor, sharp and distant. I looked at the invoices one last time, then slid them into an envelope addressed to the Marrows' new apartment. No bitterness in the motion, only closure. When the mailbox clanked shut, I stood on the porch a moment longer. The air tasted of salt, and something lighter, maybe relief, maybe grief learning to stand upright. Either way, it was mine. By the end of the month, Port Townsend had turned on its latest fascination unpaid bills. The wedding's vendors had begun to whisper, and whispers in a small town never stay contained. I heard from Mara first. They posted notices on the business board downtown, she said over the phone. Seabrook Garden Hall, catering. Even the quartet, your daughter's name right there under delinquent accounts. Rhea Marrow is threatening legal action for defamation, which tells you how real it is. I didn't answer right away. My tea had gone cold again. She built her life on image, I said. It was bound to crack somewhere. Jonas Mara asked. I imagine he's adjusting his tie in a different mirror by now. Later that afternoon, a soft knock came at my door. It was June Patterson, an old acquaintance from the Museum Guild, one of Rhea's friends, who'd always smiled a bit too brightly. She held a bakery box and looked nervous. Catriona, I just wanted to say... She stopped, eyes darting toward the hallway. I'm sorry about what people said after the wedding. I didn't know the full story. You weren't supposed to. I said gently. She shifted the box into my hands. They're saying Rhea's accounts were frozen. Apparently. The vendors demanded advance payments before any future events. She hesitated, studying me. It's strange. I thought you'd be angry. I was, I said. Then I got tired of the noise. They wanted a performance. I just stopped acting. She nodded slowly. Maybe understanding, maybe not. When she left, I set the pastries on the counter untouched. That night, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. The words came slower than usual. Careful and clean. Love remains, but access requires respect. No insults. No borrowed money. No pretending for company. Each sentence felt like a lock sliding into place, not a wall. Just a door that needed rules before it could open again. When I signed my name at the bottom, the paper trembled slightly under my hand. Outside, the street was quiet. The town's gossip already moving on to someone else. I didn't feel triumphant. Just still. The kind of still that happens when the fire's out and you realize you never needed the smoke to be seen. I read the letter out loud one last time before sealing it. The words sounded different, spoken into an empty room clearer. Less like defense and more like truth. Love remains, but access requires respect. No insults. No borrowed money. No pretending for company. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Not from fear, but from finality. I folded it once, slid it into the envelope, and wrote her name in careful script, Mrs. Thessaly Marrow, at the post office. The clerk weighed it, affixed the certified mail sticker, and handed me the receipt. Tracking included. He said, I won't need to track it. I replied. My voice came out even, as if this were any other errand. Walking home, I realized how light my purse felt. No drafts of half apologies. No scribbled budgets with her name scrawled across them. Just a single receipt and quiet air. That evening, the sun slid behind the harbor, turning the apartment soft and gold. I cleared the table, leaving only the velvet box I'd avoided opening for weeks. My fingers hesitated on the lid, as though it still belonged to someone else's story. Inside lay a single cufflink silver, oval, engraved with the initials CW for Caleb Wexley, my husband. He had worn them only once, the year before he died, at Thessaly's school recital. The other cufflink was lost that night when we carried his coat home through the rain. He had planned for Thessaly to wear it somehow at her wedding. Something borrowed, he'd said. A piece of steadiness. Now the metal caught the lamplight, a pale gleam against the dark velvet. I ran my thumb over the engraving, tracing the grooves like the outline of a decision. It no longer felt like something to pass down. It felt like something to keep proof that love doesn't always need witnesses to be real. I placed the cufflink on the shelf beside my husband's photograph. He was laughing in that picture. The kind of laugh that lived in the eyes more than the mouth. "Looks like it's just us again," I said quietly. Outside, the harbor bells chimed once, long and low. I sealed the moment inside the stillness. The same way I'd sealed the letter, without bitterness, without hope of reward, only certainty. If she ever came back, she would know exactly where to knock. And this time, the door would open on my terms. 6 months passed before I saw her again. Summer had settled over Port Townsend, the kind of warm that carried salt on every breath. I sat on a park bench in Chetzemoka, the same one Caleb and I used to visit when Thessaly was small. A thermos of tea rested beside me, and on the far end of the bench lay a folded napkin, white cotton, embroidered with the initials TDW. Her stitches were uneven, made when she was 9. I'd kept it all these years. Footsteps approached on the gravel path. I knew the sound before I looked up. Thessaly stopped a few feet away, thinner than I remembered. Her hair pulled back, no ring on her hand. She carried no phone, no flowers, no audience. "Mom," she said, voice low. "May I sit?" I nodded toward the bench. "It's a free park." She sat carefully, leaving space between us. For a moment, the gulls did all the talking. "I was wrong," she said finally. "That day, I froze. I heard myself say it, and I hated it, but I didn't know how to stop. I hurt you." Her hands twisted in her lap. The words sounded raw, unprepared. I poured tea into 2 small cups from my thermos and handed her one. "You did," I said, "and I won't pretend otherwise." She swallowed hard. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said. "Forgiveness isn't owed, it's earned." She looked at the folded napkin beside me, then back at her cup. "You kept that. It's yours," I said. "You made it with every thread crooked, but you were proud of it. It reminded me of the part of you that still tries, even when it's messy." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She reached out, not to take my hand, but to touch the napkin gently, as if asking permission. I didn't stop her. We sat there a long time, the tea cooling, the sun lowering behind the sound. I felt the quiet between us stretch not empty this time, but breathable. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "Respect first." I said, "Then everything else can find its way." A faint smile tugged at her mouth, small and uncertain. When she stood to leave, she hesitated. "Can I come by sometime?" "We'll see," I said, and meant it kindly. After she walked away, the gulls lifted from the shoreline, wings catching the last light. I placed my hand over the folded napkin, its stitches rough beneath my fingers. "This seat will stay open," I said softly. Not promised, just available when love remembers how to behave.